It's the Church of Jesus Christ.
Religious liberty is a great privilege that goes back to the founding of our nation, and we need to be bold to defend it.
And I believe it to be of great importance for all Americans, Jewish, Christian, any other faith or of no faith at all, to understand that the values and rights and freedoms that they enjoy, that we all enjoy under the Constitution of the United States of America, is a direct function of the profound and devout belief that the creators of that revered document had.
One of the major things that people seem to forget is that our U.S. Constitution should be understood and interpreted in light of the Declaration of Independence. I like to describe the Declaration as the mission statement for our country and the Constitution as the implementation mechanism.
The First Amendment begins, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Its purpose is to ensure that the government does not interfere with religious institutions and to prevent the creation of a national religion, a concern rooted in the founders' experiences with state-controlled denominations such as they had escaped in England.
I think the founders of this country came here, a major reason for coming here was for religious freedom. We had different religious backgrounds. We had Anglicans and we had Quakers and we had Baptists and all kinds of different faith perspectives. And they wanted to live in a place where they could be free to live out their faith.
So there's two handcuffs on the federal government. One is they can't pick one denomination and make it the national, and second, they can't prohibit the states from doing whatever they wanted with religion.
I think the pursuit of religious liberty is right in the DNA of the American experience. We know, of course, that many settlers, many immigrants were drawn to these shores in pursuit of religious liberty. So this has been an abiding interest in the American experience.
Our hope is in a restoration of a true constitutional balance where we actually have three branches of government, so that the courts are actually interpreters of the law, not creators of the law, and that they respect the legislative branch and the executive branch, and we have three separate branches. I think that will go a long way to protecting our freedom.
The inspiration was drawn directly from the Bible, and it's not hard to find the chapter and verse in Isaiah where the idea of dividing government into three parts directly out of the words of Isaiah. We're understanding the notion of freedom directly out of the words of the Bible.
Hundreds of years before the American Constitution was written, Isaiah 33:22 declared, "For the Lord is our judge," the judicial branch. "The Lord is our lawgiver," the legislative branch. "The Lord is our king," which is the executive branch.
One would really have to be an ideologically driven distorter of truth to deny the obvious, and that is that the United States of America was founded on a Judeo-Christian biblical vision.
Look at any Marxist country and you'll find that religious freedom had to be wiped out first. Incredible evil comes in. Usually people are murdered in the millions. That tells you a little bit about how important religious freedom. It's much bigger than just you and your ability to live out your faith. It's the key to protecting everybody's freedoms.
In the 20th century, the First Amendment was used by the left to banish religion from the public square. Its language, keeping the federal government out of the affairs of the church, came to be replaced by the notion of a wall of separation between church and state. That understanding is now so pervasive that most people are shocked to discover that the Constitution never even uses the phrase separation of church and state at all. So what happened?
Well, on New Year's Day, 1802, Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter. He's the nation's chief executive. He's President of the United States. He wrote a letter to a Baptist congregation in New England in which he used this memorable phrase, this pithy metaphor of a wall of separation between church and state. And what Jefferson, I believe, was saying in his letter in which he uses this metaphor is that matters of religious practice, religious affiliations is something best left first to the individual, it's left to the religious society, and then to state and local governments. It's not a matter of the federal government.
Thomas Jefferson was not present at the writing or ratification of the Constitution. In fact, he was nearly 4,000 miles away as the American ambassador to France when the Constitution was being framed. And so his 1802 letter to a Baptist group sat largely unnoticed until it was seized upon by leftist judges on the Supreme Court 145 years later.
Somewhere in the 1950s, there was a couple of cases that questioned or called into question the practice of leading prayers over the loudspeaker at school, or a moment of silence in the classroom, reading the Bible, and courts began to chip away at these religious practices within our public life. And that extended beyond the schoolroom, by the way, and eventually infiltrated throughout the entire public square, until you get this case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, where the case goes through this sort of tortured logic to say, you know, if you have too much entanglement with religion and the public life, then religion has to lose. It has to take a second seat. It almost negates this entire thing called the Free Exercise Clause within our First Amendment, or let alone the Free Speech Clause.
1947, the Supreme Court takes up this case called Everson versus Board of Education. And, you know, I think it's a time in American life when there are some concerns about religious influences in public life, especially among certain intellectual elites.
In that case, over tax reimbursements for busing expenses for Catholic schools, the court uses Jefferson's metaphorical phrase while divorcing it from its intent to protect people of faith, to assert a wall of separation between church and state, which became the standard for the next 65 years.
Well, let's remind ourselves what a metaphor is. A metaphor is a comparison of two things that are not strictly identical. But herein lies the problem. If you replace the literal language of the First Amendment with a wall of separation, which is what the court has done, we go from a First Amendment, which is a restriction on Congress only, to now being a restriction on the church and people of faith and faith-based ideas. And that transforms our understanding of the First Amendment. That extends the prohibition of the First Amendment beyond the literal text of the Constitution.
Following the Everson ruling, the metaphor of the wall of separation was used to increasingly curtail Christian freedom of religious expression in the public arena, culminating in the case of Lemon v. Kurtzman in 1971, which established the so-called Lemon Test. The U.S. Supreme Court developed a test named after the main plaintiff, a self-described ethical humanist, Alton Lemon. The three-pronged Lemon Test said that in order for any school to receive government aid, it could not be used for religious purposes, encourage or discourage religion, nor entangle the government in religion. If the answer was yes to even one of those questions, you failed the Lemon Test. Although the original intent of the First Amendment to the Constitution was designed by our nation's founders to stop the government from interfering with the right to practice our faith.
Well, the Lemon Test was put in place by Chief Justice Berger, and it's supposed to be neutral, but by its definition, it's not neutral. It says that any religious expression in the public square has to be neutral in outcome, not just neutral in intent, but neutral in outcome. So if there's any beneficial effect toward religion, then it's unconstitutional. That's not neutrality.
The court's appropriately named Lemon Test had effectively outlawed expressions of faith, leaving a trail of cultural devastation. We've seen nativity scenes, menorahs, and Ten Commandments displays removed across the nation, a clear violation of our constitutional right to religious expression.
The First Amendment is a restriction on government, explicitly on Congress. It is through the supplanting of the First Amendment, the literal language of the First Amendment, with this metaphoric language of separation of church and state, which is then used to push out of that public square expressions of faith, faith-based ideas, and leaving us with a public square that has been stripped of its religious expression, even when that religious expression comes from a private citizen or comes from a church, which is clearly not the state.
But after over 70 years of the court-ordered erosion of religious liberty, things finally began to change with the judicial revolution of President Donald Trump's first term. A majority of the court, for the first time in more than a generation, has finally returned to the words and meaning of the Constitution itself, rather than Thomas Jefferson's wall of separation of church and state metaphor and the bad laws built upon it.
This is a country that was founded for purposes of protecting religious freedom. The Constitution, our federal laws, they all protect religious freedom if you're willing to stand and keep it.